Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Jaya Radha Gopinath Radha Gopinath Shri Radhe. Jaya Gaurani Thai Jaya Gaurani Thai Jaya Gaurani Thai Jaya Gaurani Thai. Jaya Jagannatha Jaya Jagannatha Jaya Baladeva Jaya Subhadra. Jaya Jaya Prabhupada 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 Jaya Jaya Prabhupada. Jaya Jaya Gurudev 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 Jaya Jaya Gurudev. Nitai Go Premanande. Jai Om Vishnupad Paramahamsa Parivajagacharya Stotra Shri Srimad His Divine Grace Srila Abhay Chandravinda Bhakti Vedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki. Jai Om Vishnupad Paramahamsa Parivajagacharya Stotra Shri Srimad His Divine Grace Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur Goswami Maharaj Srila Prabhupada Ki. Ananta Kori Vaishnav Vrind Ki. Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur Ki. प्रेम से कहो श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर शिवसादि गौर भक्त वृंद की. श्री राधा कृष्ण गोप गोपीनाथ श्याम कुंड राधाकुंड गिरि गोवर्धन की. वृंदावन धाम की, मथुरा धाम की, जगन्नाथपुरी धाम की, मायापुर धाम की, गंगा माई की, यमुना माई की, भक्ति देवी की. श्रील प्रभुपाद ट्रांसलेंडल बुक डिस्ट्रीब्यूशन की, श्री प्रभुपाद ट्रांस प्रसारण डिस्ट्रीब्यूशन की. Nidai Gaur Premanandi. All glories to the assembled devotees. Hare Krishna. All glories to the assembled devotees. Hare Krishna. All glories to the assembled devotees. Hare Krishna. All glories to Shri Guru and Shri Guranga. Hare Krishna. Welcome everyone to this morning's Srimad Bhagavatam class. We're reading from Canto 3, Chapter 27, titled Understanding Material Nature, and text 21. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Text 21. Shri Bhagavan Uvacha. Animite nimitena Swadharmena Malatmana Tivrayamai Bhaktya Cha Shruta Sambhrataya Chiram Shri Bhagavan Uvacha Animite Nimitena Swadharmena Swadharmena Malatmana Tivrayamai Bhaktya Cha Shruta Samvritaya Chiram Shri Bhagavan Uvacha Animite Nimitena Swadharmena Malatmana Tivrayamaya Bhaktya Cha Shruta Samvritaya Chiram. Word for word translation. Shri Bhagavan Uvacha. The Supreme Personality of Godhead said, Animitta Nimitena, without desiring the fruits of activities. Swadharmena, by executing one's prescribed duties. Amala Atmana, with a pure mind. Tivraya, serious. Mai, unto me. Bhaktya, by devotional service. Cha, and. Shruta, hearing. Sambritaya, endowed with. Chiram, for a long time. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace, Srila A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada ki. Translation. The Supreme Personality of Godhead said, one can get liberation by seriously discharging devotional service unto me, and thereby hearing for a long time about me or from me. By thus executing one's prescribed duties, there will be no reaction, and one will be freed from the contamination of matter. Purport. Sridhara Swami comments in this connection that by association with material nature alone, one does not become conditioned. Conditional life begins only after one is infected by the modes of material nature. If someone is in contact with the police department, that does not mean that he is a criminal. As long as one does not commit criminal acts, even though there is a police department, he is not punished. Similarly, the liberated soul is not affected, although he is in the material nature. Even the Supreme Personality of Godhead is supposed to be in association with material nature when he descends, but he is not affected. One has to act in such a way that in spite of being in the material nature, he is not affected by contamination. Although the lotus flower is in association with water, it does not mix with the water. That is how one has to live, as described here by the personality of Godhead Kapila Dev. Animita nimitena svadharmena latmanaha. One can be liberated from all adverse circumstances simply by seriously engaging in devotional service. How this devotional service develops and becomes mature is explained here. In the beginning, one has to perform his prescribed duties with a clean mind. Clean consciousness means Krishna consciousness. One has to perform his prescribed duties in Krishna consciousness. There is no necessity of changing one's prescribed duties. One simply has to act in Krishna consciousness. In discharging Krishna conscious duties, one should determine whether by his professional or occupational duties Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, is satisfied. In other place in the Bhagavatam it is said, Svanustisa dharmasya sam siddhir haritoshanam. Everyone has some prescribed duties to perform. But the perfection of such duties will be reached only if the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Hari, is satisfied by such actions. For example, Arjuna's prescribed duty was to fight, and the perfection of his fighting was tested by the satisfaction of Krishna. Krishna wanted him to fight, and when he fought for the satisfaction of the Lord, that was the perfection of professional, devotional duty. On the other hand, when contrary to the wish of Krishna, he was not willing to fight, that was imperfect. If one wants to perfect his life, he should discharge his prescribed duties for the satisfaction of Krishna. One must act in Krishna consciousness, for such action will never produce any reaction. Animita nimittena. This is also confirmed in the Bhagavad Gita. Yagnatat karmano nyatra. All activities should be performed simply for yagya, or the satisfaction of Vishnu. Anything done otherwise without the satisfaction of Vishnu or yagya produces bondage. See here, it is also prescribed by Kapila Muni that one can transcend material entanglement by acting in Krishna consciousness, which means seriously engaging in devotional service. This serious devotional service can develop by hearing for long periods of time. Chanting and hearing is the beginning of the process of devotional service. One should associate with devotees and hear from them about the Lord's transcendental appearance, activities, disappearance, instructions, etc. There are two kinds of Shruti or scripture. One is spoken by the Lord and the other is spoken about the Lord and his devotees. Bhagavad Gita is the former and Srimad Bhagavatam the latter. One must hear these scriptures repeatedly from reliable sources in order to become fixed in serious devotional service. Through engagement in such devotional service, one becomes freed from the contamination of Maya. It is stated in the Srimad Bhagavatam that hearing about the Supreme Personality of Godhead cleanses the heart of all contamination caused by the influence of the three modes of material nature. By continuous, regular hearing, the effects of the contamination of lust and greed to enjoy or lord it over material nature diminish. And when lust and greed diminish, one then becomes situated in the mode of goodness. This is the stage of Brahman realization or spiritual realization. In this way, one becomes fixed on the transcendental platform. Remaining fixed on the transcendental platform is liberation from material entanglement. Om Ajnanatirmirandhasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namah Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Gurum Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavam Cha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunathan Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakanvitam Cha He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Rishabhanu Shute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vancha Kalpatirubhascha Kripa Sindhu Bhaivacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Rama Hare Hare. Hare Krishna. We're reading from Canto 3, chapter 27, verse number 21. I'll read the translation again. Such a beautiful translation purport by Prabhupada. The Supreme Personality of Godhead said one can get liberation by seriously discharging devotional service unto me, and thereby hearing for a long time about me or from me. By thus executing one's prescribed duties, there will be no reaction, and one will be freed from the contamination of matter. So this answer by Lord Kapila Dev, is in response to the question that the Devahuti asks. If you read 19 and 20 in conjunction, number 19, she's saying, hence, even though he is the passive performer of all activities, how can there be freedom for the soul as long as the material nature acts on him and binds him? And 20, even if the great fear of bondage is avoided by mental speculation and inquiry into the fundamental principles, it may still appear again since its cause has not ceased. So the previous chapter was titled Fundamental Principles of Material Nature. So after going through all of that, Lord Kapila Dev says, yes, there's light at the end of the tunnel. Bhakti has the power to absolve us of our contamination. Just when I was reading this verse yesterday, I was reminded of a beautiful purport by Srila Prabhupada in Canto 1, verse number 3. Canto 1, chapter 3, verse number 44. Srila Prabhupada describes it so beautifully, so I'll just read it out here. It describes the glory of hearing. So, Canto 1, chapter 3, verse number 44, Srila Prabhupada writes in the purport, simple hearing is not all. One must realize the text with proper attention. The word Nivishtha means that Sutta Goswami drank the juice of Bhagavatam through his ears. This is the real process of receiving Bhagavatam. One should hear with rapt attention from the real person, and then at once he can realize the presence of Lord Krishna in every page. The secret of knowing Bhagavatam is mentioned here. Now this is where Srila Prabhupada delineates further. No one can give rapt attention who is not pure in mind. No one can be pure in mind who is not pure in action. No one can be pure in action who is not pure in eating, sleeping, fearing, and mating. But somehow or other, if someone hears with rapt attention from the right person at the very beginning, one can surely see Lord Sri Krishna in the pages of Bhagavatam. 1.344. So the glory of hearing, also the glory of hearing from the right person. One example or one pastime that comes to mind, I was recently reading a lecture transcript of Ramananda Roy that my Guru Maharaj had given, and he was describing a pastime that Srila Prabhupada shared with the devotees. Hearing from the proper person, and that how bhakti is carried in the hearts of those self-realized souls or those that are most dear to Krishna, and how that has the potency of even anyone coming in contact with them can infect them with their with that mood of devotional service. There's a pastime of King Akbar, if everyone may know, the Mughal rulers who ruled India for quite a considerable amount of time. So the pastime goes that Akbar had a singer in his assembly called Tansen. And Tansen was such a beautiful singer. He would sing with such a strong devotional fervor that was very attractive to Akbar, and Akbar was very fond of Tansen. And one day it came to him that, to his mind, that if Tansen sings such beautifully, I would like to see his master. How glorious would his master be? And then he inquired about his master, and then he says, my master is Haridas. And he said, I would like to go and meet your master. So he takes him to see Haridas. Now Haridas was living in Vrindavan, again, very pure in mind, very pure in action, very pure consciousness. When King Akbar approaches him from a distance and sees him sing the glories of the Lord, he feels a transformation within him. And as per some sources describe that he had a gold coin that was or some valuable jewel that was within his cloth. He just took it and just put it in front of Haridas, just saying, this is my reward to you. However, I don't think I can pay you enough. Can you please ask me for something that will satisfy you, but most importantly, I don't think I can actually repay you for what you've given me. And at that time, Haridas says, he takes him to a ghat, and on that ghat by the Yamuna, he says, why don't you repair these cracks? And the king says, oh, I can actually give you much more. You want me to repair these cracks in the ghat? And at that moment, Haridas asks Shah Akbar to just dip his face in the waters, and then take a dip, and then just come out. And then the moment he takes a dip, by the mercy of Haridas, he's able to see how that ghat is actually filled with Chintamani jewels, and he's seeing the entire spiritual world there, the pastime that are taking place. And the moment he takes his head out, he says, actually, I don't think I can ever repay you enough. But somehow or the other, he says, okay, I'll do this service for you, but the reward that's been given to me far excels what I've experienced. So earlier in this canto, we see Sat Prasangam, in the association of those advanced souls. Our attachment, if it's because we are so contaminated by matter, we are attached to matter, but when the same attachment is transferred to saintly persons, then that opens up the door for liberation. So earlier on in this chapter, as we just read in the previous two verses, the soul is so entangled in matter, the proximity is so close. Is there even any possibility of relief? Yesterday I was hearing His Holiness Romapad Maharaj speak on these two verses, and he was describing how, as Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, Prakriti kriyamani gunakarmani sarvashaha ahankara vimodatma kartahamiti manyate. We are passive, but yet we are the doers. I'm sitting in a car, the car is going at 60 miles per hour, but still I'm just sitting, not doing anything. But yet something is happening. So mm, it is contamination is there, the proximity is there, but as described in the verse here, bhakti has the power to dissolve a contamination with matter. And what's described here in this verse is animita nimittena, without desiring the fruits of activities. And another very important point that's described in the purport is one has to, in the beginning, one has to perform prescribed duties with a clean mind. There is no necessity of changing one's prescribed duties. One simply has to act in Krishna consciousness. Famous verse in the Bhagavatam 10th canto, the Lord Brahma says, Sthane sthita. Without changing one's position, just be in your position and execute your duties in Krishna consciousness. However, the secret to all of this is one has to seriously engage in devotional service, and that requires prolonged and sustained hearing. Like his own Radhanath Swami always says, material knowledge is information, but spiritual knowledge is transformation, leads to transformation. There was a very beautiful article written by Chaitanya Charan Prabhu on this subject, that one may go on to say that how can we make the effect of hearing last for long? And you're describing that hearing is just like food. How we need to eat regularly for physical nourishment, similarly we need to hear regularly for our spiritual nourishment. So just because I ate yesterday doesn't mean that I'll have energy today. I have to eat again today. So similarly we have to hear constantly, and as Prabhupada was describing in the purport that we read earlier, 1344, hearing with rapt attention. That hearing will actually enter through our ears and will transform our heart of the misgivings that are there, as Krishna described in the 7th chapter, Ichcha and Dvesha, as he describes in the last part of this purport here. So the example that Chaitanya Charan Prabhu actually gives is, as we continue to chant and practice bhakti, there's a cumulative effect. Our default responses to the mind's desires will increasingly change to sharpened right responses. And the example that he gives is of a young firefighter. A young firefighter who's just been trained, and that firefighter will now set out on his or her first assignment. And the moment the firefighter steps out of the truck with all the equipment and arsenal that he or she has, but the very moment that he or she sees fire blazing, there may be a panic attack. There may be some withdrawal symptom. Oh, where am I? Am I in the right place? Maybe I'm not ready for this. But somehow or the other, because the firefighter is trained, because of initial training, there'll be an initial response to act in a certain way where they're relying on their reflexes, and they will act based on the knowledge that they've received, or the training, or the whatever set of protocols that they are asked to follow. As a firefighter gets trained and gets further and further more experienced, their reflexes will become further and further more sharpened. So similarly with us, in bhakti, in our Krishna consciousness, the more we hear with rapt attention, the more we chant with that sincerity, the more we associate with devotees, more we partake of the processes of sadhana bhakti, our responses will become further and further more sharpened. There's a pastime of Prabhupada that I remember, like how he was saying that was, one has to be pure in action, but by being pure in action means one has to be pure in their sleeping, eating, defending, and mating. And how personalities such as Prabhupada and other personalities who follow in those footsteps, you see their lifestyle. It's just, earlier in this chapter we see that to develop that state of mind is just not just meditating or just controlling your breath. There's actually practical guidance that's given you. One has to donate his income. One has to really live their lifestyle in such a way that's aiming for that progressive march in their Krishna consciousness. So once Srila Prabhupada was traveling with some disciples in, I believe, in Surat or some place that I can't remember in India, but it was prior to, it was in the early days in the early 1970s when Prabhupada took his first batch of disciples. And as the devotees would go around different homes, different cities, they would be invited in the homes of certain life members to honor prasad. So on a couple of occasions, at least on one occasion that this pastime is described, that a devotee were, every night they would go and honor prasad or honor food that was being offered at these life members' homes. And one morning, Srila Prabhupada asked his secretary, where are the devotees? He said, Prabhupada, they're still sleeping. I said, what time is it? 6:30. Prabhupada said, wake them up and we are leaving right now. He said, just by 2 days of eating, food cooked by, I can't remember exactly if they were devotees or they were just some pious life members. By eating their food, you see that they've become contaminated. Now you see that, they're sleeping till 6:30. What's going to happen next if they stay here even longer? So these principles of bhakti, principles of sadhana bhakti are there for us to really, there may be some instances where we lower our guard, but then what does that actually do? It has an effect on our consciousness. So we really have to be very mindful and be contemplative of what we do. Every minute, every decision that we are actually faced with is actually us seeing with this anukulena, it's favorable in our service to Krishna or not. And this again can be further and further enhanced by regular and prolonged sustained hearing, as is described in this verse here. There's also a word here in this translation, chiram, for a long time. We hear this a lot with respect to certain personalities, those that live a long time, Chiranjeevis, like Vyasadev, Hanuman, Parashara. So there's that description, they're hearing for a long time. Now one may say, oh, long time. How long? Well, one has to be patient because the proximity to material contamination is so strong that one has to be patient. However, the process is such that it can act. There's I can't remember if it's a letter or if it's a transcription of a dialogue between Srila Prabhupada and some other devotee, and maybe you can help me here. Someone asked Srila Prabhupada, how long did it take you to perfect chanting? It's in the class, yeah. And he says, but 40, I may be quoting around figure, but about 40 years. So again, this is Srila Prabhupada speaking again in the mood of humility, because he would always say there was never a time that I actually forgot Krishna. But again, he's not setting inflated expectations for us, but he's giving us a realistic view of that lifestyle transformation, or that what's needed for us to really understand what is it for us to transcend. We hear avyabhicharena bhakti in Bhagavad Gita in chapter 14. One has to practice with that determination. I had once heard Tamal Krishna Maharaj said, if you really want to transcend the modes of nature, finish all your rounds before Mangala Arati. It's because he's saying that's, if you really want that to happen, then you have to make a sacrifice, like we see in this purport here towards the end. Yagnatat karmananyatra. All activities should be performed simply for yagya, or for the satisfaction of Vishnu. So, as people living in this world, we all have to make sacrifices. For example, now shortly after this, I'll have to go to work, similarly to a lot of us here who'll have to spend a good portion of our day working. We're making a sacrifice for a result that or to get the fruits of our activities. But ultimately, that what is that sacrifice meant for? Is what we should be reminding ourselves and should be focusing on. Um, One thing that comes to my mind in regards to sadhana, and maybe I've repeated this in the past, but it's so instructive and so powerful. Um, in Yogeshwar Prabhu's book, there's this pastime of Srila Prabhupada. This is before he had actually come to the West. He was living in Vrindavan when he was living as a Vanaprastha. And actually, he had taken sannyas, but then he was translating. And in that pastime, there's someone by the name of Hridayananda Das Babaji, if I'm not mistaken. And Srila Prabhupada was living in a small room, and he was living with such austerity that every night this devotee would hear Srila Prabhupada just screaming out. He would call him Abhay Babu, Swamiji. He would hear him every night just screaming out, while he was sweeping the courtyard. You know, hey Rupa, hey Raghunath. He would just, from the top of this, innermost chamber of his heart, he would just be praying in such earnestness. One day he approached Srila Prabhupada and he said, Swamiji, you live by yourself. There's no one there to clean your room. I would like to clean your room. You're quite busy. You because you go during the day to, I think for publishing purposes or to meet with different publishers. Can I assist you with your chores? And somehow or the other, Prabhupada agreed. And then when he came during the day, as he was cleaning the room, he saw on the roof there were some cobwebs there, and because he was a Vrajavasi, he knew that just to be very mindful. So he just slightly just took the cobwebs and just moved them to another corner or whatever he did to just clear up the space. In the evening or whenever Srila Prabhupada came to the room, Srila Prabhupada said, "Where have these spiders gone?" And this person said, "Oh, I was just cleaning up the room, just helping you." He said, "That may be the case, but understand that I am new to Vrindavan and these residents of Vrindavan have been here for generations. So we are actually junior to them." And this person was just spellbound. He didn't know what to say. And he said, I've lived in Vrindavan all my life. My previous forefathers lived in Vrindavan all my life, and I can say that I've seen no one like Swamiji having the sadhana that he had. Of all the people that he has seen, this is someone who's lived in Vrindavan, never stepped out of Vrindavan, and again understood to be living in that pure state of mind, pure state of consciousness, and speaking such of Prabhupada. So the sadhana is such that they never compromise on that, and that's what's most inspiring for us and for most instructive for us to understand. And then there's, when I was hearing His Holiness Ramapad Maharaj speak on this verse, and he was actually going about and just expounding further on this concept of animita nimitena, without desiring the fruits of activities, with a pure mind. Again, we hear this word tivraya, serious. Anyone know which verse that we hear? Tivrena bhakti. So, akama sarvakama mokshakama saradi tivrena bhakti yogena jajita purusharpanam. So, whether one has any desires, material desires, one has to worship Krishna. Tivrena bhakti. One pointed attention. So there's a beautiful verse in Bhagavad Gita chapter 2 where it's described, a person who's not disturbed by the incessant flow of desire that enter like rivers into the ocean, which is ever being filled but is always still, can alone achieve peace, and not the man who strives to satisfy such desires. So desire may come, every moment we're bombarded by desires, by our thoughts, but as we become further and further trained again, rapt attention, prolonged hearing, staying in the association devotees, performing our services in the mood of service, then our reflexes or most our responses to these whatever desires may come to us will obviously sharpen, and we won't be affected by it. That's what Kapila Dev is actually responding to Mother Devahuti here. Again, tomorrow's verse 22 will speak further on performing austerities, and as we've described here, that one has to be pure in action. Pure in action means pure in the words, eating, sleeping, and so on and so forth. So one has to be regulated, which, again, that sense of regulation will come by the sense of hearing, if as and when we attach that eagerness for hearing. Okay, so I will end here. I think it's almost 8:40. If anyone has any question. Yes, Prabhuji. Yep. Thank you, Prabhu. So you're saying you're offering, for example, you offer food or any. Yeah, thank you, Prabhu. Yeah, good question. See, Krishna sees the sincerity uh, in our offering. So when we are making that offering, even with our chanting, recently I attended a Japa seminar by His Grace Mahatma Prabhu, and in that he said, obviously chanting, there's mechanical chanting, and then there's chanting that comes with feeling. And as I was, he said chant with feeling, which means, and he had photos or slides. There was one slide that if you've seen Krishna embracing Gopakumar, and he was saying that this is who Krishna is. He's waiting for us he's waiting for our love, and he was describing that even further. So he said, chant with feeling that Krishna, I want you. And I remember for myself when I was going to that retreat, when he was asking all of us to chant, as I was focusing on that bit, with chanting with feeling, I could feel the resistance coming, my mind saying, oh, you have these desires, and as I was focusing on that, just keeping my mind afloat from, just for now, just let me focus on this bit of just chanting with feeling. Actually, we chanted about, I think, altogether in that little span, because we broke it up, we chanted 4 rounds. After the second round, I could feel that resistance weakening and weakening further, because I was focusing on the devotees that were there were sharing their realization, because they were focusing on the feeling aspect of it, that whatever came to their mind, they somehow or the other just said, okay, we'll deal with it later. So coming to the point of when we feel insufficient or whatever, emotions that we are going through in our offering, if we just focus on the positive aspect of it, that again, as this verse says, Krishna, sam siddhir haritoshanam. Krishna should be satisfied. So Krishna, please, whatever I'm doing, this is for your pleasure. I may be imperfect. I may, this may have not come in the most purest way that I would have liked to, but if you kindly desire, please accept it, and please give me the intelligence, because Krishna is sitting in the heart, is described in the 10th chapter. I sitting in the heart, dispel the ignorance in the heart by the shining lamp of knowledge. So one thing that also helps us to associate with those that have that sense of purity. Even um, once I was hearing, can't remember, some devotee in Vrindavan saying that, oh, in Vrindavan here I'm very very inspired, or because of the sangha of devotees. But when I go back to my local temple or wherever, a center that I go to, I don't feel that inspired. And I can't remember which Maharaj was it. The Maharaj was saying it has to be because of the association there. But he said even if you have someone in the community or in that sangha that even is 1% more advanced than you, or 1% more potent in their hearing, and more they have more devotional inclinations, you associate with that person, because we have to associate with devotees. Devotional service is performed in the association of devotees. So associating in the proper mood helps us. Okay, I've finished. Yeah, it's like a work in progress. We all sadhaka, so we just have to at the neophyte stage, we because of the close proximity with matter for such a prolonged period of time, we act based on a conditioning. But if you see this word here that Prabhupada writes, um, seriously engaging in devotional service. Not engaging in devotional service, seriously engaging in devotional service. That's the word that actually sets the tone for us. Yeah, so we measure ourselves not by perfection but by progress. So if a lot of times, sometimes perfection can we hear about perfection, but then we measure ourselves based on our progress, because that'll help us get better. And again, uh, hearing regularly and also associating with others in a mood of service. That's what I've seen and what I've heard from devotees say as the ones that helps them transform their desires. So, yes, Prabhu. Yeah, realizing the text. Um, so Prabhupada writes, if you see at the end, somehow or other, someone hears a rapt attention from the right person. So there are these two variables there. Rapt attention from the right person. So we take shelter of Bhaktivedanta purports, which obviously to us is coming through the parampara and through the presence of a self-realized soul, Srila Prabhupada. Realizing uh, once I was hearing, I can't remember exactly, but one has to, um, I'm thinking maybe his name is Radha Swami, but he said, realizing the text. Now, let's say, for example, if I just read this and I just repeat, further and further. Realizing is for this to penetrate into my heart, which will transform my state of consciousness. When I speak it further to whoever it is, or who in whatever context I'm sharing it, that'll actually transform the other person too. Uh, I believe once Radha Swami was saying that if you've realized, even I can't remember the context of it, but if you've realized what you've just read, you will be so convinced that you'll want to share this with others. So realizing, when we first read, we contemplate on what we've read, because just mechanical hearing, obviously it's good, but when we contemplate on the subject matter, we try to understand the application bit of it. So a lot of times when we hear a class, when we hear from devotees, there's a practical aspect, there's an application bit that's being conveyed through the medium of what's being said. When we understand that and try to apply it for ourselves, for example, just last week when we had His Holiness Bhakti Prem Swami speaking on the same chapter, I can't remember the verse, it wasn't the day of the anniversary, when he said that one should, I don't know exactly the verse, text number 8. For his income, a devotee should be satisfied with what he earns without great difficulty. He should not eat more than what's necessary. He should live in a secluded place and always be thoughtful, peaceful, friendly, compassionate, and self-realized. He said, Maharaj said that we'll memorize this verse, we'll speak about it and give class, but when it comes to our own self, we won't do it. So he was saying, we realize this, we understand what's being said here and try to see what I can apply in my own life. And then we'll see how whatever has been described as the as a result of this will actually happen in our own lives. Yes, Ian Prabhu. Thank you, Prabhu. Um, we've fearing comes from the fact, okay, for example, I defending or fearing, right? Today I'm in a position where I'm at work, whatever profession that I'm in. For me to safeguard my future, I'll have to act in a certain way that'll secure, for example, if I want to keep doing the same work in the same company, then there'll be, because in this material world, or resources are limited in that sense that, everything, I'm allotted a certain quota for my sense gratification, or for the satisfaction of my senses. The moment I see that being encroached upon, I become fearful, or I want to defend, my situation. So this world will force us to always act in ways which will, because of this bodily concept of mind, I and mine, will always, because we're conditioned by this I and mine, will always do something that'll, further that. The moment we understand we are not this body, then that's what Devahuti is saying here. She said, you've spoken this whole philosophical text, I'm not this body. Now I'm about to go about in my life and say, well, I have to go about my duties. Now what? How do I go about that? So that's the answer that Kapila Dev says. Yes, it's possible. You can be in your position as long as you seriously engage in devotional service. You won't be affected by this world. So that sense of defending our existence is there because we are in the bodily concept of life. We want to, we see a threat that's coming to us. Physically someone's not going to attack you, but just in a circumstance, the moment we feel that, now there's something that could affect my life or my existence going forward, then naturally I become fearful of it. And how do I combat that? Again, the way out of it is to transcend the bodily concept. Okay, we've gone. Thank you again. Grantra Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai. Srila Prabhupada ki. Ita Go Premanandi. Gaur Bhakta Vrinda ki.